wonderful institution that is now over 3 years old, and it's lovely to see so many of you braving the now cooler weather, but also the interesting, I guess, campus environment that we are experiencing at the moment with all the geopolitical issues and how the students are dealing with them, particularly over there on the South Lawn with the encampment. And of course, some of you may have passed Arts West, where there is a takeover of that building. I would like to especially acknowledge a few very special guests. It's lovely to have a member of the Menzies family here tonight, Diana Menzies, such a great supporter. And I would like sorry Diana to sort of put a pinpoint on you, but I would like everyone to note that she's wearing the Menzies tartan to match the curtain. What's wrong? Maybe that's why the curtains are a bit shorter. But they are. I'd also like to acknowledge two of the board members of the Robert Menzies Institute board, David Kemp, lovely to see you, and our newest board member, Professor Timothy Lynch. It's wonderful to have you here too. And Master of Queen's College and great friend of the Institute, Stuart Gill, always lovely to see you. And Japarra Club members and members of the Institute, it's just wonderful to have your support. It means so much to us, and means that we can hold events like this and do all the wonderful things we do across our exhibitions, but also our research program, our schools program, our wonderful online content, and, drumroll, our new website that's about to open in the next few days. Tonight you will hear from a very, very special speaker, and I am not going to delay your wait too much longer, but tonight is the opening of our 5th exhibition. Can you believe it? We opened to the public in March 2022, the exhibition space, at least, this museum. I was actually, for those of you who were at that event, it was a bit of a rollicking evening with quite a few students who were less than enthusiastic about our existence, making their views heard by a bit of thumping on the windows outside. But it has been wonderful to bring out items from the Menzies collection that the university owns and was given to the university in 1978 by Robert Menzies upon his death, and it is a labour of love for our curators, and I would like to acknowledge, I can see our former curator here, Will Cook, it's great to see you, and our newest curator in Victoria Hronis. This exhibition is an exhibition that tells the story of Robert Menzies, the key themes of his life as a political architect, as a family man, as a liberal, his incredible role as a nation builder, and of course his work as a patriot, as a true believer in the good of Australia to make a difference internationally. And of course you can see his incredible legacy that lives on today. This exhibition, the Poet Among Statesmen, we've called it, is a little bit of a off-piste theme for us at the Menzies Institute. Most of our work has been around his political achievements, the founding of the Liberal Party, his international achievements like signing the alliance with the United States, the ANZUS, or the commerce agreement with Japan. Tonight we're going to talk about art and poetry, which are things that meant a huge amount to Robert Menzies, and I hope that you will see a side of him that you might otherwise not have been aware of. I should just, and I'm going to be naughty, and I'm going to put my wine glass on something that I tell everyone else not to. So sorry. I was about to put it on Menzies' desk. I thought a terrible example there. I did want to, before I hand over to our guest speaker, just tell you about two of my favourite items on display that are newly on display. And these do not include the items that I'm sure our guest speaker will talk about, which are also some favourites of mine. But please do look out in the other room for the Order of the Rising Sun. I don't know if any of you saw Julie Bishop's photographs the other day, but she received the Order of the Rising Sun in she's wearing a beautiful colours and patchy dress, and the medals you see out there are pretty weighty, and I did see her sort of silk dress kind of, down to the ground with the weight of these beautiful, beautiful medals. The lacquer box that is the medals would have been displayed in, and of course the sash. These are things that the Japanese government gave to Robert Menzies because of his significant commitment to rebuilding that relationship with Japan post-World War II. The other thing I'd love you to see is behind Diana and David over there, and that's the movie camera, the 16mm movie camera that Robert Menzies used to take all those incredible home movies. I mean, they're home movies, they're movies he took beyond the home as well, in London during the Blitz, so during World War II. You see in the documentary that we normally have on the screen over there, intimate moments with the Queen, with Winston Churchill. That is the camera that took them, and it's next to the projector that showed the films. And apparently in the party room in Old Parliament House, Menzies would regale and show these edited films to the party room, who of course obediently enjoyed them all, I'm sure. But finally, to our guest speaker, we are incredibly lucky to have David McCubbin with us tonight. He's, of course, the great-grandson of the internationally renowned artist Frederick McCubbin, who was a significant figure of the Heidelberg School of Art, and he was an art teacher, and his artworks will be incredibly familiar to you all. They are very much emblematic of that early Australian nationalism, and I'm really looking forward to hearing David speak about his family member, not just as his great-grandfather, but David himself, a student here at the University of Melbourne in fine art and architecture, an architect and an artist, and someone who is well known for an erudite and very delightfully entertaining speech. He is also president of the Savage Club. Oh. And that's important for many reasons, not least because, who would want to be president of the Savage Club? But Robert Menzies was also president of the Savage Club. I think he may have been the longest serving president for 15 years.
20 years?
And, well, I have here from 1947 to 62, which almost exactly matches his second period as Prime Minister. So he was obviously, saw them as two incredibly important pursuits. The Savage Club, for those of you less familiar with it, is a club for the bohemians in Melbourne, the artists, the theatrical writers, and David will speak more about that. But it's interesting that Robert Menzies, seen by some as a serious, double-breasted suit-wearing politician, had this wonderfully playful side, and obviously spent many an hour at the Savage Club, and we look forward to hearing more about it from David. But thank you.
Ladies, gentlemen, members of the Menzies family, former members of the Australian government, significant members, I might add, Georgina, Christina, Victoria, and members of the board. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and I'm going to read some notes occasionally, but most of the time I'll probably just wing it. I'm completely deaf almost, because I grew up with explosions, crackers, 303s, you name it. In an era when I was in the arts, if there was a camp there would have been a mountain of beer cans. And it's very disappointing to see that waggishness has been dissipated in the incubus of political dialogue in the 21st century. Now, I should actually also preface this it is my firm and profound conviction that Australia, since settlement, has always been at war with itself. Not a war of the haves and the have-nots, not housing affordability, not equality, not any of those mainstream principles you might think are the foundation pieces of a liberal democratic society. No. It's more serious than that. It's always been a war between the libertarians and the wowsers, the Puritans and the Cavaliers, the life-indulgent bohemians and those who nowadays, if they weren't the Levellers and the Cromwell era, would now be called the battalions of the woke, who have symbolised their personification, Hannah Gadsby, who's turned the art of humour into a dull, sanctimonious sermon. No wonder, while champions of bohemianism in this country, as famously said, internationally famous in Australia, Barry Humphries, couldn't even get a state funeral because he was an affront to basic tenets of liberalism. And of course, the champion of that is that man over there. Ming, Robert Menzies. And I think this is an undercurrent. I will describe certain fragments from the family history, and we all know, as good historians do, you've got so many primary sources, so many secondary sources, just make the rest up. And if it's a rollicking yarn, no one's going to mind. Thank you very much. It's my follow-up talk to Manning Clark, who never let fact get in the way of a good story. So this all begins in the context of contemporary Australia. The whole foundation of the explosion, it didn't happen in 1972. It was already laid by Ming, as we all know that. Ming set up education. My father, who served in the Pacific War, couldn't have done medicine post-war without the sort of kind of policies that were brought in by Chifley and Ming, who actually liberalised and made university education affordable for ordinary Australians. And that's a legacy which I think we're all profoundly grateful for. And I wonder, well, anyway, I'll leave it a wonder. The first part is, it was at an afternoon at Georgina Parks's house. Where is Georgina?
Oh, Christina.
Oh, Christina. So I beg your pardon, Georgina. It is hard with children. I'm doing the best I can. And Christina said, I have a book which I'd like to look at. And I said, what a great idea. And Christina lives in Kooyong Road in an old, a lovely mid-century house. There are not many of them left in Kooyong Road. Most have been demolished, replaced by pseudo-Georgian or sort of blockhouse persecution complex. And it was nice to sit in a garden which wasn't protected with security cameras, razor wire, and voice print and facial recognition technology. We sat by her pool, and Georgina raced into the house while I'll engage with other conversation with members of the Parks family. Now, Georgina's denied this, but I'm sure she's related to Henry Parks. And it's curious, we've got so many significant names, the Downers and the Parks, here in this institute, both who have made enormous contributions to the idea of service and to the general well-being of Australian society. Christina raced in. I was mindlessly just minding my own business. I know what the Parks Library is like. There's a ladder. It's a sort of vernacular thing. And on the coffee table, bathed in afternoon light, is Robert Menzies' biography, Afternoon Light, which is best read in afternoon light. She went through the copies, of course, Macaulay's History of England, History of English-speaking people, the compendium of Mary Shelley's works, the Rubaiyat, James Joyce's Ulysses, and of course, famously at the Parks House is a coffee table, which one of the legs is missing. It was knocked off by the family dog years ago, and one corner is now propped up by the complete volumes of Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. She picked up this book on Australian butterflies. I'll show it to you. Aha. It's this book. This book was the first large folio book produced by my uncle, Charles, on Australian butterflies. The reason why I brought this along is the preface has a letter written in code, basically for the benefit of my grandfather, which talks about Australian art. And of course, why Robert Menzies did this is because it's a symbol of the individual. He actually hung around with practicing artists. And of course, we'll deal with this later, he was one of the people who set up the Australian Academy, which was an attempt, probably spearheaded by Lionel Lindsay at the Savage Club, to knock back the insidious influence, as they saw it, of modernism. Now, it's one of those earlier culture wars, and modernism won. But the reason why they did it, and of course I could mention there's a whole pantheon of Australian artists, and I refer to them in the general sort of kind of descriptor of the Great Mud School, and that's another Humphreyism, where they got so good at producing not just Impressionists, but if you look at the works of Buckmaster and others, they perfected the use of a sort of burnt sienna, raw umber, sort of kind of sludgish Impressionist reality. And you had exemplars like, Meldrum, and if you weren't a Meldrumite, he'd take you out and kill you. And then you had two artistic communities in Melbourne at the time. And once again, remember this is the eternal war between the Wowsers and the Libertarians. One was run by John and Sunday Reid, the so-called progenitors of the modernist movement. My father had the misfortune, as a young boy, of afternoon tea at John and Sunday Reid's. He described the most pretentious, self-important, nacriously self-interested individuals he'd ever met, led by Sunday, stinking filthy rich, who pretended to be a sort of neo-Marxist. And how they'd sit, bore themselves witless, propounding one great truism after another, and then blindingly drunk, retire. My father at the age 9, trying to catch a caper white in their garden, was seized by the hand by a mad Russian who said, "Why you catch butterfly?" Because that's what I do. His name was Danilia Vasiliev. My father raced in and said, "Who's this mad bloody Russian?" And they all sniggered. "He's a great contemporary artist." And that was the sort of kind of actress. The other colony was at Montsalvat, which was full of lewd, nude, lascivious, rampant sex, absolute grogology. What a wonderful place to be. That's the real story. And the person who could describe 1930s Melbourne with absolute clarity is not with us, and of course that's Barry Humphries. And Barry wasn't a fan of John Reid. But I defer. What I'll do is, the Savage Club, of course, time moves on, but in the 30s and 40s, when the Academy, we had a succession of famous visitors: H.G. Wells, Vivian Holland, who's Oscar Wilde's son, Stanley Holloway. What a genius of stage. And it was all about celebrating this contest. Letters, love, laughter and the love of friends is the Savage Club logo. And of course it was set up by those Bohemians in the 1890s. The other principle of those Bohemians is we're dealing in an era where people spent 30 years in the first part of their life mastering perspective, figurative art, light and shade, depth, all those manifestations which they inherited, well, they believe they inherited from the school of Athens, cast as the most important foundation for art. And that's why I think modernism struck them as an affront. And that's why Robert Menzies enjoyed, also it's an easy walk from barristers Owen Dixon Chambers down to Bank Place, where they could talk about art and drink, and talk about literature and drink, and talk about poetry and smoke, and talk about civilization. Kenneth Clark, another visitor to the Savage Club. I'll read this letter. Normally I'm embarrassed to do this sort of thing, but this book, rather like that book out there, was very unusual because in the olden days, before really sophisticated printing, most art books were about that big, except for special editions of the Studio, which we still have, and copies of the French satirical magazine, excuse my French pronunciation, La Zénarbois, something like, and it was always showing pictures of Queen Victoria looking like Gina Reinhardt. Looking like a grotesque sort of caricature of empire. So I'll read this, and I might be embarrassed, but it's unusual to hear a letter like this because I'll take out the bits, because that's nauseatingly self-indulgent where it mentions family. But he says, this quite lovely book is the work of the founding father of the notable McCubbin clan, the great Fred McCubbin himself. This is fascinating. It's a book on butterflies. So I'm sure he would have written a similar forward to a book on engineering, technology or science. Charles, the son of Fred's second son, Hugh, though discouraged from taking art in secondary school, nevertheless went on to study art at the Royal Institute of Technology, included portrait painting under Murray Griffin. Huge man. His boyhood love of the bush, an irresistible desire to paint, its beauties combined to mould his future. His exhibition of wildflower paintings at the Josh shall continue. Charles McCubbin lives at Box Hill, a place with strong family associations. His grandfather, of course, was a fine artist. With his well-known associates, particularly Arthur Streeton and Tom Roberts, he played a memorable part in what has become known as the Heidelberg School. But with Hughie McCubbin, he will, at the drop of a handkerchief, argue it should have been known as the Box Hill School. That is actually a legacy to cultural cringe. It actually did happen at Box Hill, but you can't have an art building called Box Hill. It's not going to do. Hughie, at the drop of a handkerchief, argued, but this is a little moment. It is what these painters did that counts, having the benefit of the work and techniques of the French Impressionists, and being immensely conscious of the exciting clarity of Australian light falling upon Australian landscape. They created a new era in the history of Australian art. Pretentious and wordy newspaper art critics, I think he's having a go at Robert Hughes, who described Fred as the Norman Rockwell of Australian art. But, of course, you had to make a living in art in those days. So you do portraits, you do nostalgic stuff, and everybody died by the time they were 40, so of course death and all that sentimentality was just a necessary part of Victorian art. Here we go, here. Wordy newspaper art critics affect to despise this nowadays, but only because they have discarded the basic virtues of drawing, have abolished beauty, and regard incoherence as a positive virtue. However, I must insist, I know that I am an old square, the sort of troglodyte who loves to live with these pictures and find a new beauty in them every day. Fred McCubbin had a keen eye for colour in the landscape and the colour in the brush. He looked around him with the eye of romance, and wherever he looked, he found it. I venture to think that he has an imperishable place in the history of Australian art. His eldest son, Louis, became director of the Adelaide Art Gallery. He himself was a fine painter in his father's tradition, but used to say to me, with self-deprecatory irony, that his one permanent addition to the Gallery of Prime Ministers in Canberra was that in the portrait of Alfred Deakin, painted by Fred McCubbin. Louis served as the model for everything except the face. His second son, Hughie, is, I'm happy to say, a great friend of mine. I don't think he claims to be a practising artist in his own right, but he is an artist at heart. On my rare appearances nowadays in the Savage Club, I always look forward to seeing him, and it usually turns out that he is there. He has a genially explosive style which delights me, and to his son, Charles, who has produced this notable book, etc. And that's where this book and that book hold a certain special significance. Georgina showed me the very fine book that was produced by Lethine in 1919. Fred didn't see out the First World War. My grandfather was pretty badly wounded at Gallipoli, which saved him from being blown to smithereens in France as members. All of them were members of the gallery school, and they signed up for the big adventure, and you know the rest of the story. And, the book itself, produced by Lethine, my great-uncle Alexander, Hughie's brother, then set up his own art publishing company. This book is a very, very bittersweet testament. My grandfather came back after 4 years of convalescence in British hospitals. He had 4 years back pay. His brother was virtually insolvent. He said to his brother, lend me a gear and I'll pay you back. No worries. Never saw the money again. And of course, that era, Fred died, his brother went down in the Lusitania, my grandmother lost 3 of her brothers in France, and in a way, the Depression, it's all My Brother Jack country, you know, it really is the shadow of that era, I think, positively paralysing a subsequent generation. I know my father grew up with it, and he regarded art. They lived in a house, part of this backstory of the book. They lived in 434 Punt Road, South Yarra. They leased an Italian manor, which is now a car park. It has been since about 1975, of Harrison Moore, a significant member of the legal profession. I've now read the essays of Menzies' early life, and I realised how Owen Dixon, Harrison Moore, and all these significant individuals really moulded. I also realised that there's such a combination. Fred really dearly loved Alfred Deakin, in as much as my grandfather and my great uncle dearly loved Robert Menzies. And my father grew up in a place which was bedecked with all the big pictures you see in the National Gallery, by the Pioneer, and the big portraits you see in the Government House. My grandfather, when my father went over to London, as most GPs did, to do his practice, my grandfather, who's a dear friend of Darrell Lindsay's and Rob Menzies, said, I'd like to give them to the state. Because in the old ballroom at 434, they were just gathering mildew and rising damp and, you know, the usual problems of trying to hang on to art, which was worth in the 1950s, bugger all. The only picture I have is sell this for 5 guineas by Friday or else, or words to that effect. That's the reality of art in the olden days. They sold their place at Fontainebleau up near Clyde on the other side of, and it was Darrell Lindsay by Robert Menzies who took on all these paintings, and in a way that's an absolute blessing, because if my grandfather hadn't have given those paintings away, I would be extremely wealthy. And I'd be corrupted by the stain of wealth. And I wouldn't have to work for a living, don't worry about superannuation, or feel the scars of paying school fees over several decades. I'll cut it short. There's pages and pages I wrote, but really it's about, I think, Robert Menzies, an absolute passionate supporter of the art scene. We now have politicians, this is the other thing, the final note is, like the Lindsays, another great family, they're all self-taught. Nobody in our family had an education. My great-grandmother was an Irish woman from County Clare who said, education's a load of rubbish. And they're all self-taught, but they could quote complete Shakespeare. They could quote Donne. They could quote Homer. They knew literature, and that was the incredible bond. And they knew all the artists because they were all hard-working journeymen who worked in an era when discipline and skill held the measure. And before, it was all hijacked by gatekeepers, grey-faced curators with German helmet haircuts, wearing black, who had the knackerest feeling just because they were gatekeepers and bureaucrats themselves, that somehow they were creative to screw and take down artists for being what they are under their own stinking self of importance. That is, I think, the great legacy of Robert Menzies, and it should not be forgot. We need to build shrines to him, akin to Zeus on Olympus, and learn that our greatest leaders are often almost forgotten people. Forgotten people that I've almost forgotten about, and I've forgotten to forget why I should have forgotten. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very, very much.
I'll beat that.
First and foremost, thank you, David, for sharing your invaluable insights into your great-grandfather's life in relation to Menzies. We are very grateful to have you here and for contributing such a lovely speech to this evening. So thank you very much. For those who do not know me, I am Victoria. I am the new museum assistant at the Robert Menzies Institute. I curated this exhibit alongside William Cook, our past curatorial librarian, Georgina, our CEO, Bailey staff, and our conservators, Irina and Hannah. They provided essential help throughout the whole process, providing essential knowledge, and I'm so very grateful for all the assistance. Now, the Poet Among Statesmen, the name of the exhibit, in fact, unfortunately not my own words, but rather a phrase I found in The Poetry of Cricket, an anthology which we have on display in the leader case in the foyer for you to enjoy. It really helped me figure out where I wanted this exhibit to go, really pinpoint the parts of Menzies which, as a politician, he wasn't really prone to show. His love for the arts, poetry, and in some of his own prose, his dramatics. I really wanted to showcase that he didn't just think of campaigns and policies. Rather, he had a well of thoughts regarding morals, virtues, the passing of time, the beautiful nature all around us, and how we as Australians appreciate art and nurture our own homegrown talents. So I hope that this exhibit really highlights that and reflects these ideas and values. Now to highlight some of the items on display, we have 2 editions of the Melbourne University magazine featuring one of his earliest poems, De Natura. He's quite young as he writes these poems as he's studying at the University of Melbourne, but his convictions are clear and you can tell that he's ready to have them heard. So truly the makings of a great politician. Now in the Nation Builder case, we have 2 photo albums, one from Japan and Malta during his trips in the 50s overseas. We have a picture of Menzies holding his movie camera, and the joy really on his face really elicits the same reaction from the viewer. So I hope one can feel his passion. Complementing those 2 items, we have the movie camera that he's actually holding, the lens and the case that it goes with. From pen to lens, we can really see that his medium of art has changed, but his appreciation for it hasn't, even as he's grown older. Other items on display include a book by Tom Inglis Moore, Bernard O'Dowd and Shakespeare, really an intriguing insight into how Menzies loved both short and long-form poetry and theatre. And last but not least, the art of F. McCubbin, which David has talked a lot about, but I just also like to highlight what an honour it is to have in our exhibit, in our collection, and to really display the pioneer, which really symbolises who Menzies and his father were. They led a life of toil, not in the sense the farmer did in the image, but in servants to our country and for trying and succeeding in making a better tomorrow for all of us Australian citizens. Therefore, though Menzies did not spend most of his days reciting and writing poetry as he might have hoped, I hope that the legacy that he leaves us allows us to both reflect and admire his thoughts and beliefs. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Christina, for organising such a lovely event. Thank you, David, again, for your lovely speech, and please enjoy the rest.